Hey, what's going on guys? It's Daz here. Today I'm going to bring you a video just to go fully in depth with each of the settings and also my own settings that I use in Battlefield 5. I'm going to try to do this real time and hopefully I don't stutter or stammer too much. Be sure to leave a like if you found any of the tips that I'm about to give helpful, dislike if you didn't. So let's start with video settings. So the video settings, obviously with the full screen mode, you want to go full screen so you get the least amount of input latency. If you tab in and out of the screen a whole lot, then of course switch over to borderless. But again, there is an added input latency when you do that. Now full screen resolution, this is pretty self-explanatory. Make sure that it matches your resolution of your monitor. Brightness, I always put mine a little higher just so I can see a bit more. You do have the option to lower it or raise it depending on the preference. Field of view. This is a little different from previous Battlefields, also a little different from the beta. The field of view actually for horizontal, as one of my Twitch viewers, Funk Metal, actually told me about, changes a little bit. So you notice that the horizontal is different and it's actually set to 101 here, but it's actually 85 located here. You can do the same thing for the vehicle field of view as well. Now, if you want your ADS to be the same as the field of view that you have in game, then you want to turn this on. Now, if you don't want the field of view that you have, maybe because it's extremely high, and also because targets are going to look a little smaller because of the ADS, and you want to turn it off. It's personal preference which one you actually prefer, and a lot of people usually get hung up on this. Motion blur, I usually tell people to turn this off. I absolutely hate motion blur, I hate the way it looks, but if you prefer it, then by all means you can mess with the setting. ADS depth of field effects. Pretty much what this setting does is that it kind of blurs the image. Usually when you see this in cinematics for Ascend, you can kind of see whether it gets blurred or it doesn't. Like the best example would actually be for your pistol. You can zoom down the sights and everything kind of blurs around the pistol, but then it kind of puts everything in focus. This one is also a personal preference. These I recommend turning all off. This can really bog down, not really the performance of your game, but the visuals that you see on the map. So you can turn off the chromatic, the film grain, vignette, lens distortion. Sorry if I mispronounced this one right here, but I always turn these off personally. So now for the advanced settings. For DX12, if you're going to go with RTX on later, you're going to have this on, but for performance, it's best to have this off. High dynamic range. Currently, there is a bit of a bug with this, so if you find that your game is super dark or super bright, make sure that this is off. Most times, if you don't have an HDR screen, this doesn't really matter too much. You don't have to worry. Resolution scale is automatically going to be at 100. The higher you bring it up, the higher the resolution. The sharper the image is going to be, the less FPS you're going to get. The lower, sometimes you get more FPS. It'll also lower the resolution overall. Frame rate limiter, doesn't really matter what you put this. If you want to match it to your monitor refresh, you can always do that. I set mine to 200. I also put G-Sync on when I use it. This one is very, very tricky, future frame rendering. I'm going to post in the description down below talking about future frame rendering as a whole and what it does, because there is a whole thread about getting into this. I'm going to keep the simpler version here for you guys. For future frame rendering, if you have a really beastly computer, then you're going to probably most likely want it on. It's going to add a little bit input latency, but if you have a lot of cores, you got a great GPU, you're probably not going to feel it too much, so having it on is going to give you more FPS. An example of that would actually be me. I have a 2080 Ti i9 processor. I actually don't feel a whole lot of latency input whenever I have it on, but whenever I have it off, the crazy part is I drop like 60 to 70 frames because the GPU is no longer being utilized as much as it should be. So if you have it off, you kind of have to play with this because everyone's computer is going to react differently to this setting, 100%. Some you might find it better to be on, some might find it better to be off. I personally find getting the FPS jump a lot more effective. Again, description down below. Vertical sync. Now with vertical sync, most of the time you want it off. It adds a little more latency. It kind of syncs things together. I recommend having it off if you're going to be, try hard competitive. The only reason why you might have it on is just to have it sync up with G-Sync, but just have it off. Leave this on auto, doesn't really mess with too much. GPU restriction, I have off because I mess with my settings quite a bit. So the UI scale factor here, just leave it 50. Let's talk through each of these settings. I drop everything on low and medium, partly because I want the game to perform as much high FPS as humanly possible, and the game still looks fantastic on stream. For you guys as you're watching, because of the bitrate isn't that high. So texture quality, obviously, the higher the setting, it's going to reduce performance. The lower, you're going to get better. Sometimes if you lower these too low, especially for quality and texture filtering, you might get a little flickering. Things kind of blend a little bit more together. Lighting quality, I usually have this off because it can be quite the performance hit. on low. Also effects I have on low because if you drag these up, believe it or not, it actually puts a lot of stuff on your screen and sometimes it can be harder to see target. Post quality, some may prefer this as a personal preference of how it render the game. If you mess with the setting, this is more of a preference. Mesh quality. This one is actually going to improve performance the most. When you drop it lower, things will pop in and out from the distance, meaning if somebody's behind a wall, sometimes you might be able to see them. Now if you have it on high, that wall is going to appear, you won't be able to see that target. So if you're going super try hard sweaty, go with medium and low. Terrain quality, this one goes without saying, kind of goes with the texture quality. Undergrowth quality, this one's more or less for the grass and everything on the ground. This one again kind of goes to mesh quality. The lower it is, the better you're going to be able to see items and things. This one's tougher. You can't turn the anti-aliasing off, which really sucks. I have it on high just because it looks better with a 1440p monitor. Some of those that have 1080p might actually find that it works better on low. Ambient, here this setting mostly offers in terms of quality. It hits really hard. The difference is very small. If you go look online, look at images, the quality difference isn't that huge, but it can really make screenshots, cinematics, anything like that. If you're playing the single player experience, I recommend just throwing this all on ultra and just enjoying the experience. But if you go multiplayer, I recommend just dropping it on low. So next, I kind of want to talk about some of my gameplay settings and audio settings and so forth. So audio settings, very self-explanatory. These are very easy. I usually turn the voice off. I usually do headphones. Those sometimes like war tapes. I've seen that before. The reason why war tapes, just everything sounds super loud, but the problem is it's harder to hear footsteps. Now, let's go over to gameplay. So gameplay, I show the HUD, chat log is show. I change my crosshair color. I make sure I show my kill log, I show my kill feed. Some of this is just all preference. It really depends if this is what you prefer, but you can have this here, kind of look back at this, pause the video, see what my settings are. These are all preference settings. Again, I like the hit color to be blue. I like the headshot color to be pink because when I go through my footage, I want something to be very bright so I can physically see it. Now the kill color I have red just kind of sits with me, but these are also preferences. I have my mini-map size very large. That's also a preference towards me because I want to be able to see it from the bottom left because I think it's also too small. And I turn this off so it kind of blends a little more in the background and so forth. You can also change how things stick out. So if you don't want to see friendly soldiers at all, you can drop that down to low. If you don't want the objective to be seen, but if you just want to see enemies only on the mini-map, then just drop that to 100. Or if you just want to see friendlies only, you can do vice versa. That's pretty much what these settings do. You can do it for the same thing for the ADS icons whenever you're aiming down sights. So ADS, if you didn't know, means aiming down sights. Advanced. So this here, the aim assist and everything does not affect anything with gaming for PC unless you're using a controller. I have it off anyways, just out of fear, like what if it actually does something? It doesn't do anything. Everything else, if you want the, let's kind of break this down a little more. Soldier auto leaning. If you just don't like the fact that it peaks over or anything like that, you can have these off. I don't really find them to be much of a worry. Parachute auto deploy. After a certain amount of time following, it auto deploy. If you don't want that, you can have it off. Maybe you're trying to do a cinematic or something and you just want to see the soldier just fall to his horrible death. That's always an option. Context order given. You can also turn this on. This is mostly for your squad leader. Plane chase for those pilots, whether or not you want your third-party camera chase. I don't really fly, so I won't really have much input on this one. The network graph, you can always hide unless you're trying to see your latency. You can turn this off. That's preference as well. Aim lead indicator. This one is whenever let's say your ping is too high and you want to know your ping is high, then you probably want to show this. Let's say if you're around the 200 range and you kind of bounce back and forth. Whenever your ping is extremely high, then you're going to probably feel it a lot more in terms of leading your shots. You're probably going to want to know when that happens. Alright, so we've gone through quite a bit here. Let's go through controls next. You can see my sensitivity. I have 0% sensitivity. My DPI, I use 1800. I had this on 0. I leave all this alone. I don't really touch it at all. Soldier zoom sensitivity, I leave it alone as well. I like to hold when I sprint. You can toggle it if you want. That's always an option. Double tap forward to sprint. You can do that. I don't like it. I leave that off. It's also off by default. The soldier weapon zoom. This one I like to hold. Same thing. People always ask, do I hold whenever I zoom in? I hold. I don't really do much in the vehicle. I just kind of leave it alone. You know me, I snipe. Gamepad, this is all for controller. I don't have as much input here, partly because I don't use a controller. When you go to advanced, this is the only thing. I don't touch any of this. I don't recommend you touch any of this unless you are really big on your sensitivity. And if you did, I recommend mousesensitivity.com, which I'll put in the description down below as well. So the stick acceleration, this mostly goes for your aiming with a controller. Uniform soldier aiming. I get this question a ton on stream. If you are aiming without aiming down sights at all, and you're just aiming from hip fire, if you have uniform soldier aiming on, it's going to match whenever you're aiming down with a 2x, a 3x, a 4x, 8x, anything like Battlefield 1, and now obviously with Battlefield 5, you'll see that difference there. Now, I have it off. That's a personal preference. Actually, for muscle memory, it's best to have this setting on. So you kind of play with this. It also helps if your sensitivities are to the extreme, whether they're super fast or super slow. You'll notice this a lot more. Most games usually have this off. Battlefield is very unique where they give you the option to have it on. The coefficient overall, you just want to leave this alone, leave it 133%. If you kind of really know what you're doing, you can always toggle this. Otherwise, I recommend you don't really touch that. Trust me. Controller tuning, I don't play on a controller, so I'm going to leave this to somebody else who really knows what they're doing. Obviously, just leave this at default. You don't have to touch anything here, so don't worry. Last thing I'm going to cover is just my keybinds. I get this a lot. What I do, some of the ones that really change are my interact keys. In games, I like to use interact key with F. B I use for the radio. Let's see, what is different located here? Don't really change too much. Firing mode is with V. I know I do my charge on X and the bayonet charge there. I throw a grenade on Q, that used to be G. I move it there. When I use my bandages, I want to E. Things we want on the Q, E, R, G, V, C, X, Z, anything there, you really want it to be comfortable and close to you. That's why I tend to use those keys. Example, I use my crouch toggle on Z and I use prone on C. All personal preference here, but just some of them that I look at. I know I covered a lot here. Hopefully this was very helpful and insightful of what I do and the reasons why. My biggest advice when you're looking at any of these settings is to understand why those settings exist and do they help you achieve your goal of personal preference and comfort. These are mine. I go through all of them, and these are all personal preferences and comfort for me. They do not mean they're wrong, and they do not mean your settings are wrong either. But I just always advise that you feel comfortable whenever you're gaming, and if there's something you don't like on the screen, you might be able to toggle it and mess with it under video settings, such as, whenever you see lens distortions, things of that matter. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks again. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, a dislike if you didn't, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.